In the early hours of May 11th, 2012, a fire tore through a quiet home on Victory Road. Inside, 6 children slept, innocent, unaware that the flames weren't a tragic accident, but a plan. Not by a stranger, not by an enemy, but by their own father. His goal? To win back custody, to paint himself as a hero, to collect benefits. But nothing went to plan, and by sunrise, 6 young lives were gone. This is the story of Mick Philpott, a man who weaponized his own family for greed, control, and fame, and how the system let him get away with it, until it was too late. Before we begin, please like, comment, share, and subscribe, and also turn on the notification button so you don't miss any of our videos. Michael Mick Philpott was born in 1956 in Derby, England. There was nothing particularly unusual about his early childhood. No horrific origin story, no diagnosed disorder, no glaring red flags, at least not on paper. But those who knew him, even loosely, would say he always had something off. From a young age, Mick craved control. He wasn't the class clown or the quiet loner. He was the boy who always had to win, even if he cheated, even if it meant hurting someone else. And when things didn't go his way, his charm flipped instantly into fury. At 19, he met Kim Hill, who was just 15 at the time. She was young, impressionable, and thought Mick was exciting. He showered her with attention, gifts, and promises. To Kim, he seemed like a protector, a dreamer. But the dream would quickly curdle into a nightmare. At first, Mick was sweet, but that sweetness had a switch. It didn't take long for Mick to become possessive, jealous of anyone Kim spoke to, furious if she looked the wrong way. The violence began quietly. A shove, a scream, then fists, then weapons. Kim would later describe the early warning signs that no one saw or wanted to see. He isolated her from friends, monitored her every move. When she tried to leave, he pulled her back in with apologies and threats. She was too young to realize she was being groomed and too afraid to escape. But people noticed and looked away. One night in a public pub, Mick cracked a pool cue across Kim's face. She was left bleeding from the mouth in front of a crowd. Not a single person stepped in. In 1978, after 2 years of escalating abuse, Kim finally found her courage. She wrote Mick a letter, breaking things off. It was the act of a desperate teenage girl trying to save herself. Mick saw it as a betrayal. Instead of respecting her decision, he went absent without leave from the army, broke into Kim's home in the dead of night, and crept into her bedroom while she slept. He carried a 9-inch knife. Kim woke to stabbing, again and again, 27 times. Her stomach was slit open, her arms, legs, back mutilated. As she screamed in agony, Mick uttered the words that would chill any soul. "If I can't have you, no one else will." Kim's mother, a trained nurse, ran in to help and was stabbed 11 times herself. Despite the brutal attack, both Kim and her mother survived, barely. Kim died twice on the operating table. Her lungs collapsed. Her organs were punctured. She would require years of recovery and decades of therapy. When the police arrived, Mick was still in the house, sitting on the stairs, calm, cold, holding the bloody knife. "I wouldn't bother," he told the paramedics. "She's a goner. I've done a good job on her." But perhaps the most disturbing part of all, what happened after the arrest. Philpott was charged and convicted of attempted murder and grievous bodily harm. The evidence was overwhelming. There were no pleas of innocence, no claims of provocation. The court gave him 7 years and 2 months. He served just 3 years before being released for good behavior. A man who stabbed 2 women nearly 40 times walked free after barely 1,000 days in prison. Kim would later reveal he had written to her from behind bars, letters filled with lies, manipulation, even proposals of marriage. It was proof he had learned nothing and intended to continue his reign of terror. Once released, Mick wasted no time finding a new partner. Then another, always young, always vulnerable. Each woman was drawn in by his charm and slowly dismantled by his rage. He became a serial abuser, a walking red flag wrapped in smiles and smooth talk. And no one, no school, no police force, no judge ever stopped him. Mick Philpott would go on to father 17 children, not because he loved being a dad, but because each child meant more government benefits. To him, they weren't kids. They were currency. And this was only the beginning. After the near-fatal stabbing of Kim Hill and her mother, Mick Philpott should have been locked away for life. But instead, the justice system handed him a second chance, and he used it to destroy more lives. Once released in 1986, Mick returned to Derby not as a man reformed, but as a predator emboldened. The first woman to fall under his spell after prison was Pamela Lomax, a young mother who believed, like many, that everyone deserves a second chance. On the surface, Mick was polite, respectful, even charming. They married, had 3 children, and to outsiders, they looked like a normal working-class family. But behind closed doors, Pamela was trapped. She would later say she lived in fear of her husband, walking on eggshells, praying every night that he direct his rage somewhere else. Pamela never reported the abuse, not because she didn't want to, but because she knew what he was capable of. She knew what he'd done to Kim Hill. She knew he could kill. In her words, I just hoped he'd find someone else and move on. And he did. In 1993, Mick, then 37 years old, began a relationship with 14-year-old Heather Keogh. Let that sink in. He was almost 40. She was barely in high school. Heather was from a troubled home and had been vulnerable. Mick saw that and pounced. By her 16th birthday, Heather had run away from her parents and moved in with Mick. He promised her stability, love, a family. Instead, she became his next prisoner. They had 2 children together, but Mick's obsession with control intensified. He beat her regularly. Once, simply because she gave birth to a boy when he had wanted a girl. Worse still, he turned his sons against her, encouraging them to join in the abuse. When she refused to have more children, he punished her. He'd lock her outside the house, sometimes barefoot in winter. One night, he held a knife to her throat for answering a call from her sister. Eventually, Heather escaped, climbing a fence while he slept, but she was forced to leave her children behind. It would take a grueling legal battle to regain custody. Years later, Heather called Mick a Jekyll and Hyde personality. He was the perfect boyfriend at first, then he became a monster. By the early 2000s, Mick had grown bolder and more twisted. In 2000, he met 19-year-old Mairead Duffy, a single mother escaping her own abusive relationship. Mick positioned himself as her guardian angel. He played the savior, the protector. She was vulnerable, and he offered her peace. Within months, they moved in together. The following year, Mairead gave birth to their daughter, Jade. But Mick wasn't done. He soon met Lisa Willis, a 16-year-old orphan and single mom. He took her in too and turned the household into a twisted, polygamous arrangement. Mairead was the wife. Lisa was the mistress. Mick was the king of the castle. They all lived together. 2 young women, 11 children, and 1 increasingly dangerous man. And they shared a 3-bedroom council house in Derby. It was a setup almost unheard of in modern Britain. But Mick wasn't satisfied with just control over 2 women. He wanted their wages, their benefits, their bodies, and their children, because to Mick Philpott, children weren't family. They were assets. Philpott had fathered 17 children by the time the tabloids dubbed him Britain's biggest scrounger. Each child brought him more welfare income, housing, food allowances, child benefits. While Mairead and Lisa worked, Mick remained proudly unemployed. He saw himself as too good for work. Why would he, when his children earned him over £25,000 a year in government payments? He demanded a larger council house and began appearing on national TV to complain about his circumstances. In 2007, he appeared on the Jeremy Kyle Show, where he angrily defended his lifestyle. Viewers were shocked when he introduced both Mairead and Lisa on stage, smiling, as though this was normal. He even claimed he would divorce Mairead just to marry Lisa, and then divorce Lisa again, so she wouldn't feel left out for not having his last name. That same year, Mick starred in a documentary hosted by Conservative MP Anne Whitcomb, who spent a week living in his home. Her mission was to show him the value of work. She secured 3 job offers from Mick. He turned them all down. When asked why, he said his criminal record and media portrayal made employment impossible. In reality, he had no interest in work. His empire was built on other people, specifically women and children. Whitcomb later said, he didn't care about anyone but himself. He referred to both women as slags. None of the children sought affection from him. And yet, the outside world still saw a family man, the kind neighbors greeted on the street, the type the media loved to vilify, but rarely took seriously as a threat. But behind the walls of that Derby home, tensions were boiling. Lisa and Mairead, initially close, began to crack under Mick's manipulation. They competed for his approval. They lived in fear of his rage. They were prisoners in a house built not on love, but on fear, control, and survival. Mick Philpott's entire world revolved around domination. He didn't just abuse women. He broke them, molded them, used them. And when Lisa finally found the courage to leave in 2012, taking her 5 children with her, Mick's carefully constructed kingdom began to collapse. But instead of accepting the loss, he plotted revenge. He wasn't about to lose his benefits. He wasn't about to lose control. And so, he devised a plan, one so horrifying no one could have imagined it. Before we continue, I would like to ask you to please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss a new video from us. By May 2012, the walls of 18 Victory Road were heavy with secrets. Mick Philpott had grown increasingly angry and desperate. His longtime mistress, Lisa Willis, had finally walked out of their chaotic, polygamous household 3 months earlier, taking her 5 children with her. To Mick, this wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was financial sabotage. His benefits were dwindling. The carefully constructed image of the patriarch of a massive family, complete with 11 children under one roof, was starting to crack. And most of all, Lisa had dared to defy him. She had embarrassed him, challenged his authority, taken something that belonged to him. But Mick had a plan, a twisted, senseless, and tragic plan. He would start a fire in the home, just small enough not to hurt anyone, or so he believed, but big enough to get attention. The goal? To frame Lisa Willis, to make her look like a bitter, jealous woman who'd endanger her own children. Mick imagined the headlines, the interviews, the custody win. He saw himself on television as the grieving hero who tried to rescue his kids from a fire started by his vengeful ex. The idea was delusional, but delusion had always been part of Mick's character. He enlisted help. His wife, Mairead, loyal, broken, and eager to win his approval, agreed to participate. So did Paul Mosley, a family friend who had grown disturbingly close to both of them. In truth, Mosley was more than a friend. He had been manipulated into sleeping with Mairead under Mick's orders. Mick watched. He encouraged it. It was all part of the sick game of control. And so, in the early hours of May 11th, the 3 of them put their deadly plan into action. They poured gasoline to the home's mail slot at the front door, igniting it with a match. The idea was simple. Start the fire, scream for help, and then heroically save the children. But fire doesn't follow plans. Within seconds, the flames spread up the stairs. The thick smoke barreled into the bedrooms where the children slept. It was 4 a.m. when the neighbors heard screaming. Sirens were called. Emergency crews arrived, but it was already too late. 10-year-old Jade, 9-year-old John, 8-year-old Jack, 6-year-old Jesse, and 5-year-old Jane were all found lifeless in their beds. The heat in the upper floors had reached 500 degrees Celsius. The air they had breathed was thick with smoke. Their half-brother Duane, just 13, was rescued alive but died 2 days later from his injuries. 6 children, gone, dead because of a lie. Dead because their father believed they were worth more to him as victims than as living, breathing human beings. But even as emergency responders were trying to say what they could, something fell off. Mick's behavior didn't match the tragedy. He was loud, but not grieving, animated, but not broken. Later, when police and mortuary staff dealt with the aftermath, a mortuary technician recalled something disturbing. Mick had put one of the officers in a playful headlock while viewing his children's bodies. He was smiling, laughing, and then came the press conference. Standing in front of cameras with Mairead by his side, Mick wiped his eyes theatrically and thanked the public for their support. He said they were donating Duane's organs to save other children. He pleaded for privacy. But to detectives watching behind the glass, something didn't sit right. Mick wasn't acting like a father who had just lost half his family. He was acting like a man relishing attention. Behind closed doors, the police launched a deeper investigation. They found that petrol had been used to start the fire. They discovered a glove and a container discarded nearby, and they planted a covert recording device in Mick and Mairead's hotel room. What the tapes captured was shocking. Mick was recorded coaching Mairead and Mosley on what to say. They say every child deserves a parent, but not every parent deserves a child.
Were you crying when you were saying it?
Not really, really bad, but I did cry.
On the circle.
Did cry.
On the circle. Let it go then. You won't listen. It's my fault that half the family's gone. It's my fault we lost our children. It's my fault we lost Park children. It's my fault we lost Lisa. I should have seen it all coming up. It is my fault. It is my fault.
There's a fingerprint on the window.
And that's it. That's it. A few discrepancies. That's all it is. Long and shaky.
Mick knew what he had done. He admitted as much on tape. Police interviews further revealed that Mosley had sex with Mairead the night of the fire, over a snooker table. Not out of love, but out of loyalty to Mick. Mick had manipulated the people around him to such a degree that they were willing to destroy their own lives and those of innocent children to serve his agenda. The tragedy of Victory Road was never a spontaneous act. It was a cold, premeditated plan executed by 3 adults who underestimated the power of fire and overestimated their ability to lie. Their names were Jay, John, Jack, Jesse, Jaden, and Duane. They never stood a chance. The final verdicts brought some semblance of justice. But for the community of Allenton and beyond, the shockwaves from Mick Philpott's crimes would linger far longer than any prison sentence. Even as Philpott began serving his life sentence, requiring him to serve at least 15 years before parole consideration, many questioned whether true justice had been served, especially considering the immeasurable cost. 6 young lives. For the grieving city, the pain was visceral. Floral tributes piled up outside the charred shelter of the Philpott home. Teddy bears, school photos, and handwritten letters from classmates bore silent witness to the community's heartbreak. Vigils were held. Candles were lit. Strangers held each other as tears streamed down their faces. Not just for the children, but for a society that had somehow allowed this to happen. The UK's media launched a fierce debate in the wake of the tragedy. On one side, people demanded a hard look at the welfare system, a system Philpott had undeniably manipulated. On the other, child advocates and survivors of domestic abuse argued that the focus should not be on benefits, but on how easily abusers like Philpott slipped through the cracks of social services and law enforcement. In the courtroom, Mrs. Justice Thirlwall did not mince words during sentencing. She described Philpott as the clear ringleader, the mastermind behind the cruel plan. "Your children died because of your callousness and your craving for control," she said. The judge's voice trembled, slightly, betraying the emotional weight of the tragedy. She condemned his history of manipulation, coercion, and violence, calling a pattern so deep-rooted it cost lives. Mermaid Philpott, sitting beside her husband in the dock, kept her head down as the judge delivered her final blow. The reminder that, while Philpott may have orchestrated the fire, she too bore the weight of responsibility. She had chosen loyalty to a monster over the lives of her own children. Following her conviction, Mermaid attempted to appeal her sentence. Her legal team argued she was a victim of coercive control, too terrified to defy Mick. But the Court of Appeal dismissed her claim. Judges stated that her actions, participating in planning, lying to investigators, showing no remorse, revealed more than just blind allegiance. They revealed complicity. Despite this, Mermaid was released from prison in November 2020 after serving just half of her 17-year sentence. She was given a new identity for her protection and transported under heavy security to a halfway house. For many, the sight of a convoy escorting a woman responsible for the deaths of her 6 children felt like a betrayal of justice. Paul Mosley, the third accomplice, had also been released in May 2021 after serving part of his sentence, only to return to prison in 2022 for breaching parole. He was released again in late 2023. The idea that two of the three individuals responsible for such a horrendous crime were now free men walking the streets stirred outrage and sorrow. Meanwhile, Philpott remained behind bars. His life in prison was reportedly far from peaceful. Sources claimed he was reviled even among the prison population, often the most unforgiving toward those who harmed children. Psychologists who evaluated him described him as a textbook psychopath, exhibitionist, manipulative, incapable of remorse. He continued to proclaim his innocence, casting himself as the misunderstood father rather than the killer he had become. Kim Hill, Philpott's first victim, broke her silence following his conviction. In an emotional interview, she recounted the years of torment, the horrific night he stabbed her and her mother, and the disbelief that he had been released so early after such a brutal attack. Had he served his full sentence, maybe those 6 children would still be alive, she said bitterly. The national conversation expanded to the topic of domestic violence. Many pointed out that Philpott's escalating abuse had been documented across decades and multiple relationships. Women's rights organizations call for reforms in the way authorities respond to reports of abuse, demanding more thorough risk assessments and long-term monitoring of repeat offenders. Paul Mosley, the third accomplice, had also been released in May 2021 after serving part of his sentence, only to return to prison